Here we have the brain that we'll be dissecting. Now you can notice that there are meninges that are covering the brain. That's this coating. Now I've already pre-cut this to make it easier to help out with the video here. But what you need to do is take a look around your brain, but then work on cutting off these meninges. When you do that, you want to slowly slice part by part. What you don't want to do is cut in the brain. So as you slowly work through it, you're going to notice that certain spots, like here, which is between the cerebrum and cerebellum, have a little bit deeper pieces. You notice it's actually like a form and a shape. So we'll work on getting those out of the way. And then we can see our brain. Now that cutting will take a few minutes. Don't worry, don't rush it. The key thing is you want to keep this brain intact underneath those meninges, underneath that dura mater. So before you go and cut through the brain, you want to kind of look around and see what you have. If we look at the inferior side of the brain, we're going to notice that we have these structures right here. Now, these structures are going to be cranial nerve number 1, or the ends, I should say, of cranial nerve number 1. These are your olfactory nerve receptors. Right here, this and this are going to be your optic nerves. When they cross over in the middle, that's going to be the optic chiasma. As you move back, you'll see the brainstem here. You'll notice that we have some extra meninges. You'll notice that we have right here the spinal cord. But we move up to this first bump. The first bump is going to be the medulla oblongata. Move past that, you end up with the pons. And beyond that is the midbrain. If we look at the lateral view, you'll be able to see the separation between the cerebrum and cerebellum. That gap, that's going to be your transverse fissure. Should be able to see the transverse fissure. If we look from the superior or the top, we're going to notice that right between the two hemispheres here, this is the longitudinal fissure. So your longitudinal fissure is between the right and left hemisphere of the cerebrum. Once you've found the external structures, you're then going to want to make a cut that is as close to mid-sagittal as possible. So when you cut, you want to cut right down the middle and go right through the whole thing. As you're doing this, you will not be able to do it in one single cut. So one cut, stretch it out a little bit, one cut, open up, keep opening it as you cut through. What you don't want to do is you don't want to slide. So now that we're open, we can look at the external features. So we have our two hemispheres here, our two halves of the brain. We're going to focus on just one half, just to make things simpler to identify. So we move this one out of the way for now. Now, this hemisphere, this side, we're going to start all the way down here in the spinal cord. Because see how there's this gap, this spacing. This is what's going to go up into the cerebral aqueduct of the brainstem. In that cerebral aqueduct, we're going to notice that there is a space right in here. This space between the cerebellum and the brainstem, so this space right here is your fourth ventricle. You'll notice that you can see in the brainstem that this is going to be the medulla oblongata. That's where you have that first bump. Then you have the pons, which is the second bump right here, and the midbrain in this section right here. So as we go through those, you move from the medulla to the pons to the midbrain. Inside the midbrain region, you're going to find the corpora quadrigemina. That's these two bumps right here, the corpora quadrigemina. Now the top part right here is the superior colliculi, while the bottom part right here is the inferior colliculi. So two parts to the corpora quadrigemina. If you look at this bump right here, you'll be seeing the pineal gland. We move right to this oval shape, so I'll trace that around. That oval shape is going to be the thalamus, with the area below it going to be the hypothalamus. Now normally the hypothalamus would have the pituitary gland right here, but quite often that comes off when you remove the meninges. Other structures defined. Well, we can see this piece coming back and around. This is the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum. Now, the corpus callosum will give us a good benchmark of where we are inside the brain. Because if we go beyond the corpus callosum, so we have right in the middle here is a membrane. If we go beyond that and open that membrane up, there's a gap. That gap will lead into the lateral ventricles. So this would be one of the lateral ventricles. So we've gone through the fourth ventricle down here, the lateral ventricles in there. The only one left is the third ventricle, and that will be deep inside the thalamus. That would be the third ventricle. So now all these ventricles, their main purpose is to produce cerebral spinal fluid. That cerebral spinal fluid will be eventually transported down the cerebral aqueduct. So what else can we see in here? Well, if we look at the cerebrum, we know there are different lobes. The frontal lobe, we have up front, obviously. We have the parietal lobe. We have the occipital lobe in the back. The temporal lobe, we have to flip this. Temporal lobe, think about your temple. It's on the outside over here. So if we put our brain back together like this now, we can notice there are all of these indents, which are sulci. And then these upfolds, here, all these upfolds are gyri. So to find the difference, to be able to see the difference between the frontal and the parietal lobes, we need to find what's called the central sulcus. It's going to go all the way across both hemispheres, the central sulcus. That means the frontal lobe is in front, parietal lobe is after. So as we keep looking at this brain, we have most of the structures identified at this point. Some other things of note, when you look at the cerebellum back here, the part that you cut through is the vermis, right together. If we're looking at our brain a little bit open again like this, we're going to notice that we have these white lines throughout the cerebellum. Those white lines are going to be your arbor vitae. It's the white matter of the cerebellum. So we have quite a few different landmarks to be able to identify on this sheep brain. Now, one other thing we can do is do one coronal cut. So if we take the sheep brain and do one cut straight across from where we've been, and a little deeper, we've got to use our finger to open that up. You're now going to notice that we can see the actual difference of the gray and white matter. You can see the white matter is here, with the gray matter being along the outside edges. So that's the differences between your gray matter out here and the white matter inside. So this is the sheep brain.